Is this displaying on the TVs in the boardroom?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So good evening, board members. We're having this presentation today to help you get a better understanding of how and why the annual budget is developed. So first, I'm going to give a brief overview of the budget law. Wisconsin statute 65.90 defines the parameters of municipal budgets. And this law requires that all municipalities are to adopt an annual budget. This law also allows for municipalities to adopt a biennial budget process or an every other year budget cycle. Other requirements include having a public notice and hearing. The public notice is required to be published in the paper at least 15 days prior to the time of the public hearing. The public hearing and notice for the budget is held on the annual meeting of the county board. And as a reminder, the board rules state that the annual meeting shall be held on the Tuesday after the second Monday of November in each year. This year, the hearing date falls on November 9th at 6 p.m. as discussed at the Administrative and Finance Committee on June 9th. It will be at the November 9th board meeting that a resolution to adopt the county budget will be presented. I believe later this evening at the county board meeting, there's going to be a resolution changing the annual meeting to November 9th because that is not the date specified in the board rules of the statutes. The budget must be adopted on or before November 15th. And then from the hearing date, we back into when the notice will be published in the paper, which is October 25th. The budget will need to be finalized by October 18th to meet the Times Reporter's deadline of the Wednesday prior by noon for all public notices. So we have to have it into the paper by October 18th at noon to be published the following week, October 25th. The public notice is a class 1 notice, meaning it needs to be in the paper just once, and it will meet the state's requirements of being noticed at least 15 days prior to the public hearing. Oversight committees will be involved in the budget process as early as August, and this is when department heads will present their preliminary budgets to their committees. In early September, Cynthia and I will meet with all department heads to review their budget requests and make any necessary changes. Changes are not without department head input. And by October, we'll meet again with the oversight committees and summarize any changes that have been made with the department budgets from what they were previously presented with. And then in October, we'll have a budget presentation prepared and presented to the Administrative and Finance Committee, and then a presentation will be made to the county board at the October 17th meeting. October 18th, there will be another Admin and Finance Committee meeting to pass the budget resolution. The budget book will be prepared and shared with all board members well in advance of the budget hearing on November 9th. And any questions or concerns about the budget can be discussed with Cynthia and myself, and we welcome any board members to reach out to us regarding the budget. And if they're wanting to amend the budget, please discuss this with us so we can assist in guiding you for making the motion for amending the budget at the November 9th meeting. All right, so the state statutes are very specific on what is required to be in the public notice for municipal budgets. First, for the general fund, we must show all expenditures by category, and those categories are general government, and this term describes the general departments to include but not limited to clerk of courts, medical examiner, district attorney, county clerk, treasurer, maintenance, register of deeds, information technology, finance. Public safety is the next category, which is the sheriff's department and emergency management. Public works being the next category, of which we have no public works related expenses in the general fund. Health and human services is another category. And again, this is just the general fund expenditures in the public notices. So the numbers do not show the health and human services department. The numbers on this category will be reflective of the Veterans Service Office, the treatment court grant, and funding for the Community Action Council. Culture, recreation, and education. We're halfway through all these expenditure categories here. So this category includes funding and maintenance of the fair and fairgrounds, the parks, UW Extension, and funding to the Historical Society. Conservation and development is the next category, and that includes land and water, planning and zoning, funding for the Chamber of Commerce, Economic Development, and North Central Wisconsin Regional Planning. All right, three more left here. With capital outlay, we have no capital outlay associated with the general fund. Debt service, that's not paid out of the general fund, so we will not have any values associated with this in the notice. And finally, other financing uses, which includes our transfers to other funds, such as our capital funds. So if you recall in the 2023 budget, we used some of the general fund balance to fund our 2023 capital projects. Those budgeted transfers would be reported in this section in the public notice. All right, so what we just covered here is only the expense categories that are required to be noticed. Now I'm going to go over the requirements for general fund revenues. There are again 9 different categories similar to the expenditure categories. The first category that we're required to show in our notice is taxes, and this is not just property tax levy. This category will also include forest crop taxes, interest on taxes, penalties on taxes, real estate transfer fees, and retained sales tax discount. Special assessments is the next category, which the county has none, as current statutes do not allow a county to place special assessments on property taxes. Intergovernmental revenues is the next category, which summarizes the anticipated general fund grant revenue from the state, federal government, or any other governmental entity that has granted the county money. Next category is licenses and permit revenues. The only general fund department that has this revenue category is planning and zoning, with their permit revenue for building, zoning, and sanitary. Fines, forfeitures, and penalties is a relatively small revenue source with the county. The clerk of courts collects the majority of this revenue source, and a small amount is collected at the sheriff's office for restitution. Public charges for services is another revenue code and include most of the general fund departments that charge a fee for a service provided. Sometimes the state statutes dictate what fee, if any, we're able to charge for items such as marriage licenses or register of deed fees. Other times we have broad latitude of assessing what we charge for services such as park fees. All right, so on to the final 3 categories of general fund revenues. Intergovernmental charges, and these are charges to other governmental entities. So some examples would be the Wood County Safekeepers Contract and the Sheriff's Department, and the Quincy Zoning Contract in Planning and Zoning. Miscellaneous revenue covers all other revenue that doesn't fall into these other categories, such as interest on investments or insurance recoveries. And the last category is other financing sources, and this is typically fund balance applied in the budget, or essentially a planned spend down of the general fund balance. And typically this is transfers into the capital budgets, which I'll discuss in more detail on a later slide. These 2 lists of general fund expenditure and revenue categories are not the only information that we have to notice in the paper. So other requirements of the public notice are showing all beginning and year-end governmental and proprietary fund balances. There are 5 different categories of fund balances we're required to notice. The first being non-spendable fund balances. And those are funds that are tied up in assets or prepaid expenses. Restricted fund balances are funds that have outside restrictions. For example, state grant funds that we receive in advance, or fees that we are required to charge and set aside a portion of those fees for other programs, such as the mediation fund. Committed fund balances are those in which the county board places its own restrictions on certain funds. So for example, our capital funds are all committed funds. Committed fund balances take a supermajority vote of the full board to use for a purpose other than what the funds were committed for. Assigned fund balances, and those are funds that are set aside as a policy. So for example, our personnel policy allows for compensated absences or vacations. The dollar value of those compensated absences are calculated annually and are listed as assigned fund balances. When we budget for spending down our unassigned fund balance, this spend down is actually reported as assigned at year end of the year before the planned spend down, because we've adopted the budget and now we've assigned those unassigned funds. And the last category of fund balance is unassigned fund balance. And this category is essentially the equity of the county or the overall value of funds held, less all of the other categories of fund balances, thus the reason it is called unassigned. There's no designated purpose for the unassigned funds. The target for unassigned fund balance is 25% of budgeted general fund expenditures. All right, so here's a graph that just kind of shows the history of our general fund balance, and you can see we haven't really ever dropped below that 25% of general fund expenditures. All right, so the last two requirements for the public notice are showing the contribution of the property tax levy by fund. So pretty much everything revolved around the general fund, and this is where we get into all the other funds. So there's close to 20 different funds that receive a portion of the county tax levy. And then lastly, we must also have a summary of revenues and expenditures by fund. And with over 30 different funds that have a budget, this makes the public notice quite lengthy. And right here is just a graph that shows the property tax levy by fund for the 2023 budget. And you can see the bulk of the tax levy goes into the general fund, about $11.4 million roughly for 2023. All right, so on to the budget direction. The budget direction generally remains unchanged year over year. The budget direction is discussed at the Administrative and Finance Committee and covers a number of different areas. The area that the county has the most control over are the annual cost of living adjustments, or COLA, for county employees. The COLA is typically a percentage-based adjustment. And we try to adjust wages to match the Midwest Consumer Price Index, or CPI, for the month of April. So April of 2022, the Midwest CPI was 8.2%, which we use that number for the 2023 budget. However, due to the large percentage, the county implemented wage increases of 4% rather than the 8.2%. In April of 2023, the Midwest CPI was 4.9%, which would typically impact the 2024 budget. However, as you all know, we're currently conducting a wage and compensation study to analyze all positions in the county. And as we navigate through the budget process, we always try to budget for worst case scenario with regards to expenditures. So for the vacant funded positions, we budget them at the 2-year rate with family health insurance. So it is anticipated that the county will implement the wage study with the 2024 budget. And the results of the wage study will be shared with the Administrative and Finance Committee and the county board when we've had the opportunity to review the information, summarize it, and prepare a presentation. And another factor in the budget is health insurance. Currently, the county pays 85% of the employee premiums. We've been advised by our health insurance broker to budget for a 9% increase. We will know the actual amount of the increase for health insurance at a later date. The 9% increase is the maximum allowed per the contract, and we currently use Group Health Trust as the health insurance provider. In addition to the 85% of the premium, the county also funds half of an individual's deductible via a health savings account. This amounts to $1,500 for employees on a single plan and $3,000 for employees on a family plan. And then the retirement rates, these are set by the Wisconsin Retirement System, or WRS. These rates are typically not set until the end of June or early July. For 2023, the employer portion was adjusted to 6.8% of wages for general and elected employees and 13.22% for protected employees in the sheriff's office. And then the last major factor in developing the budget is the net new construction. This will not be made available until August. It's anticipated that the county will tax 100% of net new construction, which will result in an increase in tax levy of close to $200,000, and that's based on past net new construction. If net new construction is zero or negative, the county cannot increase the tax levy at all. All right, so moving on to capital budgets. The capital budgets cover the replacement of all capital assets in the county. We budget for replacement for every single item, like I said, and some of these items may not necessarily be capital assets on their own as they do not meet the threshold of $5,000. However, there could be a large quantity of the item, which would justify the need for including them in the capital budget. Some examples of items under 5,000 in the capital budget would be tasers, radios, laptops, fire rings, picnic tables, etc. You kind of get the idea. But there's a large quantity of the item and they're under 5,000, but we still include them in the capital budget. We use a straight line depreciation method to come up with the estimated funds we need to set aside annually. So for example, if we have an asset that is worth $100,000 and will last a total of 10 years, we will set aside $10,000 a year. So we're budgeting for an asset over the entire life, whether it be 5 years or 15 years. The capital budget worksheets that we use only show what assets are scheduled to be replaced in the next 5 years. However, we still budget for this asset every year until it's time to be replaced. There are certain capital plans that we project a salvage value at the end of the life cycle. In some cases, such as with our fleet vehicles, we're predicting a salvage value equal to, if not greater than, the purchase price. So I'm just going to show an example here of capital budget. So this is showing a capital item that is worth $15,000 with a 10-year life and no salvage value. And we're budgeting for this asset, but have no plans to replace it in the next 5 years. But you can see in the 2023 budget, we funded this asset with the general fund balance applied. Further years, we're funding through sales tax. However, if there is enough unassigned funds in the general fund, we will fund capital assets the same way using the unassigned fund balance from the general fund. And this next example shows an asset purchase in 2023. Down below, under funding sources, you can see the different funding mechanisms for this purchase. The general fund balance is applied is the normal amount of funding needed to fund this asset, so $26,000. The funding of the asset typically is lower than the purchase price of the asset because it does have a salvage value, which is why you'll see that we have a capital fund balance applied of $6,500 and vehicle sales used to fund this asset of $7,000. This particular example is the sheriff's administrative vehicles. And you can see that there's purchases planned in the future years as well. All right, and then the last topic we're going to cover is budget management. This is going to go over how and what practices we use to develop the budget and how we manage the budget once it is passed. So for budgeting items that are considered below the line or anything that is not wages and benefits. So anything not wages and benefits, we refer to that as below the line. We try to look at historical trends for those items. If the spend in each code is up and down, but generally remains level, we use a 5-year average. In some cases, the 5-year average is not an accurate representation as the expenditure or revenue could be growing. This is viewed as a case-by-case basis, and if we use a different method, we will use a forecast function in Google Sheets or Excel to determine how much to budget. This is particularly useful when looking at parks or solid waste revenue sources, which tend to grow year over year. And on a quarterly basis, we submit a report to Administrative and Finance Committee that gives an overview of the general fund departments. We also rely on department heads to bring budgetary issues forward. It is through this ongoing monitoring that we identify any needs for budget amendments and bring those forward if needed. So to summarize, the budget process is something that begins early and is an ongoing process throughout the year it is implemented. Many times we have staff working in 3 different years. So right now we're actually wrapping up the 2022 audit. We're in the 2023 budget year, and now we're going to be working on the 2024 budget. And that concludes the presentation. And if anybody has any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
Any questions, Supervisor Shaby?
Kyle, thank you, Chair. Kyle, I was just wondering, when solid waste is no longer serving residential customers and we go to Adams County solid waste curbside services, where's the revenue going to be in the general fund revenues?
Solid waste department's in their own fund, so it's going to be the solid waste fund. So It falls under subscription-based services. It's a revenue line in their budget. So we're no longer going to have that revenue source, but we're also no longer going to have the expenses associated with it. And our plan is to remove the tax levy from the solid waste department in the 2024 budget.
Okay, but you just said that they're no longer providing those services, but Town of Jackson and Town of Adams already has that service, right? In effect?
Yeah, those are under contracted, and those are under municipal waste collections, I believe is the name for that revenue source.
Okay, that's what I was asking about. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? Supervisor Krug?
Thank you, Chairman. Kyle, just a quick question. Just kind of scanning the county website, I just wanted to, for myself and maybe for constituents, is there easy accessible links on our Adams County website that people could go and look at, say that the 20 items on the levy that they could look at or something like that? I'm just taking a quick look and I'm not seeing it right top of mind here.
So we do have, we have a budget folder that we work out of, that we share with all the department heads. And then there's a lot of these spreadsheets are incorporated within the budget presentation that we do. Those worksheets, we could look at making those readily available online as well. That's actually a good suggestion.
Okay, cool. I appreciate it. Thanks.
Yep.
Any other questions? Kyle? Okay, seeing no other questions, I'll adjourn the committee as a whole meeting and we'll start the county board meeting at 6 o'clock.